I feel like at some point in all of our trading journeys, everyone's revenge traded. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I know for a fact that I definitely experienced this early on in my Forex journey. And I'm more than sure that a lot of you do and have experienced that as well. So anyone that, maybe isn't familiar with that term or knows it by something else, what actually is revenge trading? Well, revenge trading is simply re-entering or changing a position because you took a loss. So for example, if I was, long gold and I decided that, I was going to take a buy position and I bought gold and, gold being gold, it stops me out and then it goes to the upside. Well, a revenge trade would be jumping straight back in and re-entering, or vice versa. If I'm long gold and it decides to drop, stop me out, and then keeps dropping, again, a revenge trade would be taking a short to kind of, I guess, get revenge, clues in the name, get revenge on the trade that you just lost and make that money back. And it's a very, gambler's mindset form of trading, because you notice with a lot of gamblers, if they lose money, they kind of go, let me just get back to break even. Let me, make this money back and then I'll be good. And that's pretty much what revenge trading is. So it's very bad. But why does it actually happen? Well, there's quite a few reasons why, revenge trading happens. But I think the main three it comes down to is ego, loss aversion, and the fear of being wrong. Now, I'll start with ego. Obviously, we all know what ego is. I'm sure a lot of us as traders probably have one, maybe bigger than it needs to be. But essentially, when you take a loss, that hits the ego in a way that it doesn't like. So if you like to think you're a good trader or your strategy is good and you get stopped out for, a reason that you could, don't quite understand, maybe it was a foolproof trade, A+ setup, and it still lost, doesn't make any sense. How could that be wrong? And more importantly, how could I be wrong? And so it starts to tempt you to take these trades to prove to yourself and to massage your ego that you weren't wrong, and in fact you hadn't, still make money. So ego is definitely a big one, and I think I've done videos on this before, but ego alone will kill your trading journey. So you really need to drop it if you have one, and just understand the markets can humble you at any point. They definitely can. So ego is a big one. Then loss aversion. I've done a whole video on this. This is a bit less of a known topic, but essentially loss aversion is the avoidance of loss. And what that essentially looks like is it's a psychological phenomenon where the fear of losing far exceeds the feeling or reward from making money. So what that essentially looks like is if I was to lose £10, that feeling, that emotion would be worse than if I made £100. So it's essentially saying that any loss that you take is going to feel worse regardless of the monetary amount than any win that you take. And I did a lot of this at university when I studied psychology, but as I said, done a video on purely loss aversion. But that is a big cause for revenge trading, because when you take a loss, it doesn't feel good. And in fact, and it's proven, it feels worse than any win could ever on the kind of emotional scale of things. So if you put the two together so far, you have ego that doesn't like to be hurt, and you have loss aversion, which essentially amplifies the loss and the feeling of that loss. And then lastly is obviously the fear of being wrong. Pretty self-explanatory, but if you put all three of those together, that kind of brews up revenge trading and the urge to do it. As I said at the start of this video, I've experienced revenge trading many a time. It's something, as I said, that every trader will experience, especially when they're new and they don't know how to kind of balance those emotions. And revenge trading, for me, my biggest one, I think, was literally a few days into my trading journey, shall we say, where I was sat on my bed and I'd just taken a gold long and it lost. And I remember that I was like, okay, fine, it's gonna sell, and I just started spam selling, like, all the way on the candle. It was pretty degenerate when I when I think about it, and essentially, well, I blew the account up. And that was kind of my main, I guess, experience and rawest experience of revenge trading. But as I said, it still happens occasionally now, especially when you're like a more experienced trader and you're convinced this setup should win and then it loses. That, as I said, can really amplify the urge to revenge trade. So now we know, why it happens, what it is, how do you actually manage it, how do you stop it? And there's a few things that I use personally to kind of overcome, at the start, the whole barrier of revenge trading, and now to kind of manage it. So I wanted to give a few ideas that I use to kind of help. Firstly is to, when you take losses, just accept them. And it's a very simple thing, but I think it's actually easier said than done. When you take a loss, there's always going to be an annoyance there, and something that you don't like and don't want to happen, of course, because who wants to lose, especially when you're a trader, probably a bit more competitive. But taking these losses and just accepting them, I think, is the first step to kind of overcome revenge trading and understand that losses are just part of the game. You're never going to have, a 100% win rate. It's just not possible. And so that's just going to happen. And unfortunately, that would be one of the trades that lost. But also exposing yourself to losing more often. Now, I don't mean, go into the market and just spam, terrible trades and take losses and kind of get used to it that way. But just whenever you take a loss, just really acknowledge it as a loss, and learn what that feels like, how to deal with it, and then move on. Because the more losses you take, the better you get at taking them, and then the better your trading will be. And you'll notice some of the most successful people and traders, not just one or the other, are very good at taking losses because they've taken so many. Because as we know as traders, what comes with risk also comes with losses. That's just part of the game. So learn to accept that. The next thing you need to do is journal more. And I don't mean like journal the actual trade, but journal how you feel both before, after, and even during the trade, and see what that kind of feels like, and read it back at a later date. And then you'll be able to kind of get a timeline of where your emotions start, finish, and end. And then you can kind of work on catching the signals. So for example, if you have a trade that loses and you get the urge to revenge trade, in your journal, write that down, write down what the urge was, why you were having that urge, what it was telling you to do. And then when you go back and look at it, you can know, okay, well, look, every time I take a loss on gold at, this time or for this reason, I start to get the urge to revenge trade. And then you can work on, changing that and seeing what went wrong. Now, the next one is kind of a instant impact one. And this is one that I definitely would recommend for people at the start, when they're, really struggling with revenge trading, is just walk away. When you take a loss, literally close the charts and walk out of the room or the office or wherever it is you trade. Just walk away. It makes it so much less tempting to not revenge trade or to revenge trade when you're not in the setup, not in the room, not looking at the charts. And give it like an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the time frame you trade, because by the time you come back, the move will have played out. It will have either gone without you or changed direction, and then there's no urge to revenge trade because it's already happened. You've missed the train. So walk away instantly when you take a loss at the start, especially if you deal and struggle with revenge trading. It makes it so much easier to overcome. And then just lastly, it's kind of, as I said earlier, about accepting the loss, but just understand that with trading, a lot of the times, especially at the moment, given how, volatile everything is, you can be right and still lose in trading. That is a very normal thing. There's not always going to be a clear-cut reason why you lose. And that's not just in trading, that's, in life. There isn't always an obvious, reason why you lose. And I think that makes it hard, because when you take losses in anything, in trading as well, if there's no reason, it doesn't make any sense to you. How do you grow? How do you develop? How do you look for new things to change and, develop if you don't know the reason why you lost? And unfortunately, sometimes you do just lose. That's just the way it works. And especially on the markets, as I said, at the moment especially, you can just lose even if you're right. So for example, it can just wick you out and then go in your direction. It maybe, you know, an A plus setup where you have 5 years of data showing that it's going to go short and then it goes long for no reason. Those are all things that could happen. And so if you just accept that you can be right and still lose, and learn that that is just part of it, the urge to revenge trade will be far less, because you did everything right. You didn't do anything wrong. So therefore your ego's not damaged. And you can kind of deal with the fear of taking that loss. So those are kind of the main things around what I do to help with revenge trading. Let me know what your kind of experience with it was. As I said, I'm pretty sure everyone's experienced it. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.